I'd like to start talking about today's topic before I jump into show slides. Slides are boring. Over the past couple of months, I've been spending time on the field talking to manufacturers. I've been focused mostly on small and medium-sized manufacturing companies through CAMS, through PNDC and AMT. And throughout all of these conversations, there's patterns that are emerging. So the most times people tell me that they're not short on systems. They might be budget constrained today, but over decades or over the past 5 years, 10 years of their operational experience, they've invested in buying up and deploying systems like ERP, CRMs, QMS. These may not be the most well-known brands, but companies do have some level of system in place. Some of the most adventurous ones still run their operations on Excel, which is great by itself, but it's still a system. They're not even short on data. A lot of these systems accumulate humongous amounts of data. But the biggest problem, the biggest pain that people tell me is that they're short on clarity at the moment decisions need to be made. So when I, as a plant manager or as a general manager, need to make a call, I know I have data in front of me, but that data is rarely enough by itself for me to confidently make a decision one way or the other. There's always context that is missing behind the numbers that I see. As an example, an operator notices something unusual during a shift, or a supervisor hears about a supplier issue. Someone observes a process drift. People talk about it. As I'm walking around the factory floor, I bring it up with other colleagues. These things get discussed, and it just disappears. It just vanishes. The signal exists, and the signal exists very early before anything compounds and starts breaking down. But by the time leadership sees issue, the expert judgment, which is the context, is lost or fragmented or sometimes missing entirely. Traditionally, the solution from the technology industry has been, hey, you need a new system, or hey, you need more processes. But that's not really a software problem. The more you embed yourself into real work, it's not necessarily a software problem. It's an operational memory problem. And that's the thing we kept noticing is that many throughput and margin problems are not labor problems or machine problems. A lot of these are surprisingly decision and prioritization problems. I need to make a call. How confident I am with the data that's in front of me to say, yes, this is the call I need to make. And so what teams end up doing, and if you are a manufacturer or you're in any team that deals with manufacturing, this should become very clear. You have a 9 a.m. team review meeting and you're trying to prioritize, and you're forced to prioritize with incomplete context. And so what people end up doing is, okay, let's make a gut call. Or worse, hey, in my previous organization, faced with a situation like this, we did XYZ. And then everyone hopes that it turns out to be the best and there are no more fires that originate out of this decision and people move on. So when this operational context is fragmented, issues escalate much later investigations take longer, and I'm going to spend time on this when I start showing the slides. Teams end up duplicating work because if it's not captured in a structured manner, people have no recollection of what happened 2 weeks ago, and hence they end up having to redo the work. But more importantly, decisions slow down. And then all of this becomes extremely painful when an auditor walks in and they need to see proof of, hey, you're telling me something went wrong. Now prove to me that you did the right thing in good faith to contain the pain and then take corrective actions. Another case is that supplier disputes drag on. If, like any manufacturer, you deal with external suppliers supplying raw material or a different part that you depend upon for your assembly, they should be extremely familiar. Because you lack the operational context, you end up getting onto phone calls with suppliers or sending back and forth emails. Everything is disputed, and at some point in time, everyone throws the bucket because all of us are tired. And we just say, okay, whatever, I lead the cost this time. Next time it's on you. Or whatever ad hoc decisions we end up making just to make sure the fire goes away and we get back to doing the stuff that is our primary responsibility. And all of these point in time problems have a major cascading effect downstream, which is that leadership acts much later than they could have. And all of these impact your throughput.
Dar, can I just ask from your
Mhm.
point of view, when there's so many things that can go wrong, like you said, it could be something that comes in from a supplier, or it could be they're missing something on the shift. Something it could be as simple as sometimes people don't have the tools at their workstation because somebody came and took their tools. I was made aware of a story of a throughput being really jammed up, and the employees had been saying, I don't get the materials to my station when I need them, so I have to wait. And the problem was they just had one forklift doing all of this, but adding a second forklift, which is a little bit expensive, could generate them so much more money. In other words, they don't see the ROI of solving a problem when operators say, I don't have the material, and it can be easily solved with a second forklift, but they'll, because they don't want to spend the money, but they don't see that they're hurting themselves by tens of millions of dollars by delaying that decision.
Yeah, that's spot on, Kirk. Very often, what I've seen is because the decision makers are so far away from where the problems are actually happening, they end up looking at it purely from a financial perspective. Again, don't get me wrong, that perspective is super important for anyone who's running a business, but those need to be backed by real problems that they are unlocking, or they need that insight into what's the real bottleneck, and does investing, let's say, a $5,000 or $10,000, I'm making this number up, but you get the point, right? On a second tool, would that alleviate this bottleneck? And then would that allow this operator to then start working on his primary job description, right? Which is, hey, move these things on the assembly line and not just sit idle, right? And so the more that we can compress the time or the distance between here's a problem on the factory floor and can the decision makers see the problem or have data about the problem in less than 5 minutes or 10 minutes versus 2 weeks later?
By the
I
way,
think that's the opportunity to improve throughput.
one of the things that I've seen is almost every shop, not every shop, but almost every shop has lean principles all around the walls, and they have signs about lean and waste, right? So they're saying don't waste time, don't waste material, all of these things. And yet, that is such a battle for them to identify the cause of waste and fix it. And like you mentioned, they often look at it financially and they're saying, how did this waste happen? And when they go back to look, they don't even know because we had to move on to the next job.
Yeah, yeah. Again, agree. And let me give you a real example. I was working with a manufacturer in the Portland metropolitan area, and what you just said is something that happens more often than we would like to think about it. It's the same problem. Operator notices something, and they did have a process, by the way. Lean manufacturing, they do a lot of, by the way, defense work. So lean manufacturing, the process expects them to jot down notes on a yellow book, and the operator did that. They did what is expected of them, right? If I'm an operator and I and my training and my organization expects me to make notes, take notes of any problem that comes up, I do my job. I take it seriously. I love my job. So I made notes, right? Guess what happened? Those notes, now I can see Sarah already smiling, were conveniently sitting in a corner, and that entire stack of notes of all of these various problems were stacked one over the other because that's what the process said, right? Now, from a review perspective, what does the process say? Lean manufacturing doesn't say you need to do just-in-time reviews, right? It's expensive to do that, or it was expensive to do that. I think I'm giving away the segue, but so what happens is organizations end up having a periodic review. So once in 2 weeks, or sometimes once in a month, depending on how small or large those teams are or how complex their operations are, someone goes in, tries to mentally wade through the stack of notes that are accumulated in the corner of the workshop, and then try to figure out, oh, okay, this is critical, this is probably not critical, what have you, and then go back to their desk, write up a report, and then send it to leadership. And it's usually over some email alias that, let's be honest, no one reads. It's probably having a rule in their email system to send it to a separate folder or what have you, right? So no one reads it. But when things blow up, that's when everyone stops whatever they're doing and goes back to painfully reconstruct from the batch, from the date when the operator originally flagged the issue, and then try to reconstruct and then create this packet of evidence to say, hey, here's everything that we did right. And then they file it as a root cause analysis or a non-conformance report if they are under AS 9100 or CMMC regulations, and then file it away. No lessons get learned. Again, it's because it's so expensive. As a human, I can't remember what happened 2 weeks ago. I'm so busy with, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I have two kids, and I have a job. So if you ask me what happened 2 weeks ago, I'm going to give you a blank stare. And it's the same problem that exists on the factory floor. If you don't pay attention at the point of things breaking, it's virtually impossible to then go back, reconstruct everything with accurate details and precision, and then put a dollar cost on it.
So, Dar, can I make the point that not only does that happen, right, but when problems become maybe too onerous or they happen over and over again, but it starts to become the new norm. This is just how we are. This is just what we do. And the yellow papers stack up and problems. I know for employees, when I was an employee many years ago, that you see the problems, but since nobody's listening to your problems, you just stop mentioning it, right? So this becomes again the new norm. So we have these problems. I can't find my tools. I can't get materials. The machine's not working. I see that it's out of compliance with standards and all this. But if I keep speaking the problems and nobody addresses them, then we stop. Then you stop hearing from the operators.
Yeah, yeah. Again, that's true, right? again, as humans, we are wired to respond to how others respond to communication, right? And this is a kind of communication when an operator raises their hand and says, hey, I'm noticing a pattern or I'm noticing a problem. And there is this gap between when they flag the problem and when eventually the response or the reaction comes in. And most often, because of the gap, I don't necessarily perceive that the response that comes from leadership is directly in response to me raising my hand and saying, hey, this is a problem that I'm noticing, right? And over a period of time, that signal compounds that, hey, I am doing whatever is expected of me, process wise, organization policy wise. I am doing everything that's expected of me, but I don't see much faster response coming in from leadership. Sometimes even an acknowledgement, right? Hey, thanks for bringing this to our attention, would actually do a lot in terms of reframing the mental model for the operators who are actually the early signal breakers, right? And so it compounds, and over a period of time, people just start treating this behavior as normal. Hey, I'm doing the best of what I can, but it looks like no one cares. So why the heck should I do it? And you can't find fault with them, which means now the problem for the decision makers is becoming more and more acute because when something goes wrong, not only do they not have data, they don't even have context. And then people resort to storytelling, and then you can easily make out, especially if you're an auditor or you're a president or a GM or an owner, you can start making out people are storytelling and you call the BS. Pardon my language here, but and that is again when you go talk to people, both on the operator side as well as on the leadership side, that becomes something that both sides keep telling in obviously different ways, but it's a genuine problem, Kirk. Okay, so given this framing, what we've noticed is a surprising amount of the operational work today is reconstruction work, audit prep. There was a manufacturer who was telling me that, again, given the size of their organization, they end up spending late nights, most days, trying to get a hang of everything that's going on in their quality department because, hey, they were the quality managers had part time and also a full time job as an owner and also responsible for sales. So, at what time in the day do they have for doing quality work or quality reviews? It's, yeah, after the kids are tucked in bed and they have a quiet time, 10 p.m. in the night. And that's when they spend a lot of time trying to pour over all of this data, performing
Srid-
root cause analysis. Yeah,
yes,
sorry, Kirk.
Sridhar, if I could mention too, you were a speaker at one of our events on compliance and meeting the demands of compliance. And boy, the people in the room, the manufacturers expressed how frustrating how much time is spent trying to meet compliance demands that they have to meet. And I'm thinking what you just said in your story that chances are that's not their first order of the business in the day, and it may be happening after hours and late nights, and they're frustrated because they can't fit it all into a day.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one angle of this whole throughput challenge that manufacturers are running into, Kirk. The other side is purely from a regulatory requirements perspective. I know I'm dovetailing a little bit here, but a company like Boeing, for example, or a company that's probably 100th the size of Boeing, could afford to hire people whose full-time job is to take care of compliance. You go talk to a manufacturing company that's probably 30 people strong and tell them that they need a full-time compliance department, you're going to get laughed out. Yeah. And that's a genuine challenge for these folks, right? They do critical work for the economy, but at the same time, the expectations of regulatory compliance is no different from a 30% shop versus a Boeing, right? And so the small guys are obviously at a huge disadvantage compared to someone who can afford to throw more people at the problem and expect the problem to go away. And that's the other angle to the throughput problem. Hey, I'm a small guy, but you're still beating me up with the same expectation
That that
that a
is
bigger
that's
company can
the rub.
seamlessly handle.
That's the rub, as I think small manufacturers have the same demands, but not the same capacity to work with that. So this is where technology comes in.
Yes. And so then the question then becomes, what would operations look like if organizations didn't have to reconstruct so much of what happened? What if the operational memory already existed for the organization? What if that context was simply retrievable versus having to be rebuilt? And I think that's where, as you said, Kirk, the technology opportunity lies, especially for the small and medium-sized manufacturers. And so for my company, that's really the idea behind my company called Fluxonix. We're not another dashboard. We are not a chatbot. And I'm very particular about calling that out. And neither are we another workflow system. What we are much more focused on preserving operational context before it disappears. As an example, a simple voice observation from the operator, a couple of photos that they can take using their handheld device, making observations around small deviations, frontline context, and that's it. And we can convert all of that into a defensible, retrievable packet that then makes a lot of these reconstruction efforts go away because it just becomes retrieval. The goal is preserving the right context early enough in the signal life cycle that organizations can act with confidence later on. So, a customer that we were working with, and again, this is a real world observation, and I wanted to share. One thing that we observed was that once this level of operational memory and supporting context was available, teams naturally started using that information during supplier conversations and, in fact, even during pricing disagreements, which came as a surprise to me because that was not what we were expecting that people would use this information for. But it just came out organically that when you empower people with this level of early frontline signal, they can build on top of that to say, hey, on so and so date, this is what we agreed upon. Why are you now quoting me a different price? What changed? And so it makes things a lot more easy versus having to go back and forth on email and digging up information.
Sridhar, this is what you're talking about of having access to the actual report of the event at the time that it happened rather than having to go back and reconstruct that. Why are we doing this? And when I was the CFO of some small companies, we had this all the time where a question would come up and we'd have to go back and reconstruct it and rebuild it to our best guess or best estimate. But we were far from accurate, where I think your solution provides an access, again, by memory, not by reconstruction.
And let me give you another example, and I think this should resonate with all of us, no matter what kind of organization we worked in. At Microsoft, it wasn't unusual for us to present about a lot of products or customer feedback and anecdotes to our leadership. And most often, leadership would go hard at us and ask us questions like, hey, what do you think about this? Why do you think this is the signal that's coming from this aggregated customer data? More often than not, we would say, hey, I'll get back to you on that. because that wasn't the main point of the conversation, but someone had a different take on the data that was being presented. But it's just that or most of us wouldn't have answers on the spot. So we would say, hey, I'll get back to you on that, finish the meeting, and then go start chasing whoever is responsible for producing that data set to say, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? 2 weeks go by before we could actually get the right answer. And then we would hurriedly craft a polished email to our leadership to say, hey, remember this question? Here's the answer, blah, blah, blah. But guess what? People moved on by then. Leadership has other bigger problems that have come up over the preceding 2 weeks that they forgot the context in which they asked this question. It took us in a leading tech company 2 weeks to figure out an answer to those questions. And by the time we would respond, they moved on. So all of that effort was meaningless because decisions were already taken. No one's going to wait for such a long time for responses and context to come up. And that was a real problem. And I'm pretty sure that's a real problem for all of us, right? And so instead of reconstruction, if we could focus on retrieval, then things would just speed up a lot. And all of this becomes especially important in resource constrained shops. For a 20-member manufacturing organization, it's all the more critical that they have access to every signal that's emanating on the manufacturing floor as early as possible, because every time I pull someone out and put them on this reconstruction work, I'm stopping something. I'm stopping a production shipment, or I'm delaying a customer escalation or what have you, right? And so I'm doing all of these trade-offs with the expectation that nothing is going to blow up. But at the end of the financial year, when I look at the numbers, I do notice an impact.
I think when I hear you say this, I'm thinking that the delays of the productivity delays for almost every company are huge because of what you've just laid out. That they can't do their real work because they're so busy responding to, could be customer disputes or it could be management questions. But yeah, I can see there's a huge downside to what's happening. And again, unfortunately, we don't know how else to fix that, so it becomes the norm. We live with it.
Yeah, agree. I was observing an assembly line at a manufacturing company just a couple of weeks ago, and an operator noticed something. This goes back to one of the points that you made earlier. They didn't have the necessary tools where they were working. So they had to stop doing what they were doing, walk over somewhere else. And while they were walking over, another colleague called them over, pulled them into a different conversation. And so they had to spend a couple of minutes with this other colleague talking to them, assimilating some of the information they were giving or providing some context from their experience. And it was eventually a good 10, 15 minutes later that they were able to get to their system, their desktop or whatever IT system. And then they had to log what they observed. I'm not blaming anyone. It's just human nature that I'm just going to do the bare minimum then because I stopped doing what was super important to me to just capture this. So I give the bare minimum, whatever the system expects me, marked with a red asterisk saying, hey, this is information that I need to fill in. I just fill it in, submit, and go back to my main job, which means there's already context lost. I, because of all of these deviations, it's not a straight line from my assembly line to the system. I go through all of these random conversations and then eventually land somewhere. I've already lost a lot of my context. I don't want to stare at the monitor and then trying to figure out, okay, what did I observe? What was all of that rich context that I had in my brain that I now need to dump into the system, right? And so they did whatever is the bare minimum, hit submit, lock their screen, move back, and then continue doing their job. And this happens more often than we think it doesn't. So coming back, as a manufacturer, you're not short on data. You have all of the information that you need, shift logs, supplier emails, you're buried in emails. Don't tell me you get less email. There's a lot of quality information that's get captured by your quality guys and operators, and you still don't have great clarity. And this happens every day. The operator notices something off. There's this other customer that I was working with. They are subject to machine inspections every quarter. And so they have their SME come in. They notice a vibration that's off. Again, make an observation, goes into a notebook. That's it. Supplier mentions a delay, and mostly it's an offhand comment that is made during a regular sync-up meeting. No one pays attention. People would be like, hey, keep me posted if something drastic happens, and then move on. And then a lot of decisions are made verbally in a conference room. And then there's those judgment calls never make it onto paper or onto systems that can then be used as a defensible document later. So, yes, there's a lot that's happening. There's a lot that is said, easily forgotten, lots that is written, but never entered, a lot of information that's logged, but never reviewed frequently. And all of this rich context is lost before anyone can actually act. So by the time, as a decision maker, you see it, there's already a delay, there's already people yelling at you, and then there's probably the part that you're manufacturing is already scrap, and you need to eat the loss. And this has become so normalized in the day-to-day operations of all kinds of manufacturing companies. But then again, the larger ones with amazing cash flow can afford to eat the cost and then write it as cost of doing business. But this hits really hard for small and mid-sized manufacturers. So what this looks like in a real shop, and this plays out multiple times a week. An operator notices a small issue. It's either handled verbally or noted down, depending on the process that exists. They did their job. Now the problem spreads. It's like a viral attack that's spreading. And by the time shit hits the fan and leaders start observing and then reacting, panic has already set in. And so it's always a rework or dealing with a customer complaint or a delay, which is even more horrible if you are part of a bigger project that is funded by, let's say, a federal grant or a project of national security importance, right? You don't want to be the person who's the cause for an overrun of a defense project budget, as an example. But if you again take a step back, none of these single steps are catastrophic, but they all compound and the cost lands on the financial balance sheet. So paradoxically, if you can address the problem at the source, the bottom line looks much better. So you can't fix something that you don't see. And the problem is not capability, right? There's amazing people who are working in these companies. They're passionate, they're driven. So it's not people, it's essentially capture. None of the companies that I am working with have these capture systems. It's always later on, or it's always a system that no one then looks at.
Sridhar, while you're on this screen, it reminds me of the Elon Musk quote that the worst part of this is when companies are busy solving problems that don't need to be solved or shouldn't they shouldn't be working on problems that the process shouldn't even exist in the first place. And what this reminds me of is you're helping companies get to the root cause first, because you had the earlier slide of the problem compounding downstream. And so a lot of times we look at the problem and we divide it, but we don't see the root cause. We see the effects downstream. And so we're busy solving effects, but never really getting to the root cause. But it seems like what you've been thinking about is going to help companies get to the root cause more quickly.
Yes, yes. And that's what I am really excited about is how do you empower these operators to capture the root cause? What exactly are they seeing? Why do they think it's an issue? What is known at that point in time? What's unknown? And that is intelligence that's super valuable when their supervisor sees it or when the general manager sees it, because it immediately signals to them, like, hey, this could become a much bigger problem if we don't address it immediately. So essentially, collapsing the time across the timeline, right? Instead of someone taking a look at it a week later or 2 weeks later, if you can collapse it in real time and give that visibility, then poof, all of a sudden you will start seeing people react. Oh my God, this could spiral out of control. What do we need to do? Do we need to stop the production line? Do we need to make phone calls immediately? Or do I need to send emails signaling like, hey, we might be delayed and hence this is an early signal and here are the things that we are working on. Watch out for a follow-up email in 2 days where we will give you a more accurate picture of what's going on. Like it starts compounding in very positive ways versus very painful ways as it does today. Again, going back, if you are again a small and mid-sized manufacturer, you could start in three areas. One, obviously, quality observations, especially as it pertains to raw material or a finished good that you are dependent upon from a third-party supplier. You could start with those observations. You could also look at supplier signals. And then the other area where this actually compounds very quickly is end of shift observations. I'm done with my 8.5 hours of shift work. And usually, lean manufacturing process requires me to produce notes of salient things that have happened or that I've observed. Again, start with that. And now you are building a digital trail of your organization memory that instead of being a reconstruction effort is a retrieval effort, which is a lot simpler. So how does this look like with some of the new technology that my company is building is before you would have verbal updates and lost context and decisions based on gut versus you have captured signals, you can start drawing visible patterns out of these signals, which means your decision turnaround time is much faster versus doing painful reconstruction, trying to do painful root cause analysis, and then making decisions. So, what does this look like in 30 days? And this is our most common way of working with our customers. We don't expect major systems overhaul. We don't connect with any of your existing systems. We're not doing any consulting project. We just structure habits for your operators and decision makers that compound. So, week one, we start with capturing what's going on the field. And then by week two, we start noticing patterns emerge. Usually around the week three, between week 3 and 4, we start seeing priorities shift as the teams go through review meetings. They start seeing the early access to this intelligence drive a better decision making. And then eventually by the end of week 4, that timeline simply collapses into much faster decisions versus 2 weeks or 3 weeks of painful reconstruction activity, then making decisions. So we're not building new systems. We are not integrating into 100 different systems. We're just bringing technology to where people are actually working and then surfacing that visibility. And with that, I'm going to stop talking.
Sridhar, your technology, when you implement this, essentially you're giving them the tools for this capture, and then your technology identifies the patterns.
Yes, yes. Technically, we could deploy a lot of capabilities once we have data to identify patterns and get to root cause pretty quickly. But the first thing is always capture, right? Like, how do you empower people to capture at the point when they observe something going off wheels, right? The more data that you capture, and then you can do sophisticated data analysis on top to say, hey, these are the kinds of signals that we are seeing. Sometimes what's not even visible, is it the same supplier who's problematic, or is it not the supplier, but the underlying metal, for example, or the raw material that they are supplying? Is that the problem? Those patterns are not obvious even today. But again, with technology, as you start looking at SME observations and then building capability on top of that, you would be able to, we can build those insights into what's actually driving some of these defects.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and I believe that your technology can exist as an app on their desktop or on their phone, right?
Yes, yes. Again, let me show you a very small screen of how this would actually look like. Oh, I need to figure out how to share. I
Yeah,
think
unshare. Yeah,
unshare and share. I think this is the one. Yeah, let me know when you guys can
yeah,
see this.
we can see it.
So this was something that I was working late night yesterday for a different scenario, but it's a very simple thing. It's a web app, which means people can use it on their phone. All it requires is an internet connection and a browser on the phone, which most phones have. They can hit a record, they can take photos, and then say, hey, where should this email go? And that email could be their own email or their supervisor's email, what have you, right? And then when they say send summary, this is where the magic happens, right? There's a conversation. I am recording as an operator what I'm observing, right? And then the system timestamps it, gives it some kind of submission ID, timestamps it, and then it clearly extracts all of these insights in terms of what happened, what are the key facts, what decision did I take as an operator, what are the next steps, what are some of the open questions and risk signals, right? Now, all of a sudden, this goes into an email, someone's inbox. This goes into a backend system that we call the memory, right? Which means at a later point in time, it's just retrieval, not reconstruction. And so when I get into quality meetings, or when I get into supplier disputes or audit or compliance related conversations, I have everything that I need. This is essentially my root cause analysis, my framework for decision making, my operational memory, everything in one packet.
So I'm curious. This is like the raw data, right? And for management and executives and owners who then want to extract this, is it essentially a query, or how does management access this?
Yeah, so essentially, there's multiple ways of getting access to this data. One, if it's living in email, you search through email, but you could also build dashboards if that's what management really likes, right? So it's really customizable. We could build different kinds of funnels for meeting where management is. So if it's dashboards that they really like, then we could do trend analysis and start showing those kinds of visualizations on a dashboard. If it's more like, hey, every Monday morning, I want a briefing document of everything that happened in the last 1 week. Imagine how cool that would be, right? I get a briefing document, just like the President of the United States gets an intelligence briefing document every day in the morning. I get my own briefing document Monday morning for everything that happened in the organization. We could do that. Or if the organization expects, oh, I have a weekly meeting, an operations meeting every Tuesday morning, we could prepare, the system can actually help the leadership prepare for that in whatever process they're using. So it's once you have data, Cook, you could funnel it in whatever mechanism the organization is using. So we are not necessarily rigid or prescriptive that way, but the system can be tailored to meet the needs of the organization versus saying, hey, there's only one way to do this.
Yeah. By the way, the flexibility of that is really wonderful. The fact that once the data is there, they can pull it up any way that they want. Those briefings that you mentioned could be dashboards if that's what they like, charts, graphs on a, and they can decide when they want to see those. What I've noticed is just kind of the power of feedback loops. And what you're providing is the ultimate company intelligence feedback loop so that leadership is no longer in the dark, just kind of guessing what's happening. They actually know what's happening, and it's coming from reliable sources and giving them feedback that they can make immediate decisions on. I think it's brilliant.
Yes, and again, agree with you, Kirk. I think collapsing that feedback loop and creating it as tight as possible is what allows leaders to make better decisions and operators to get away from that, oh, no one cares when I make an observation mindset, right? Because from the moment they make that observation and send it across, they can clearly see leaders acting upon it. And then it starts compounding. And that's really the promise of lean manufacturing. It's just that we never had the technology to make it viable. And now we do.
That's such a good point, though, that employees feel more engaged when they're heard and when their ideas are acted upon. That creates a real winning environment.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that's the promise, right? That is what gives these small and medium-sized manufacturers a huge leg up and improves their overall competitiveness, especially in these challenging times.
So, would it be possible? We're nearing the end of the hour, Sridhar. Is there an opportunity for you to share your contact information with us as they watch this video that they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I can send you an email, Cook,
That'd
or
be
you
great.
want me to spell it
Yes,
out?
and I'll put that into our description of the video and in our
Okay.
when we promote this out. But
Okay.
is it fluxonix.io is your website?
Yeah. Yeah. Fluxonix.io, and in the chat I've given my
Yeah,
email
thank you.
address and my phone number as well. So yeah, I
Well,
am really looking forward to helping CAMPS members take advantage of the cutting edge technology opportunities that are now just coming available. Super excited.
yes, I'm very appreciative, Sridhar, because we think that the strength of camps in particular is coming from our members like you. You're sharing this information, you're showing us the leading edge, how to really reduce that feedback loop. But you're also connecting us because you're so well connected. I think you're connecting us to a community of other technology leaders that can be helpful to manufacturers. So we're all part of a team trying to help manufacturers be more successful. And so I want to thank you for that and what you bring.
No, not a problem at all, Kirk. And I'm genuinely happy and grateful to CAMPS as an organization and your wonderful team. The amount of doors that you have opened, CAMPS has opened, the members have embraced me and given me access to be the pain in their bottom, asking all kinds of hard questions and being a fly on the wall on their operational pain and misery has been truly enlightening. And that's where a lot of these insights are coming from. And I'm grateful for CAMPS and their members.
Sridhar, thank you so much. And we want to thank everybody for being here today.
Yep. Thanks, Kirk. And thanks everyone for joining the session. You have my contact details. If you want to chat more, talk more, or want to engage with us on how we could help, please, you have my information. drop us an email or hit me up. Would love to have the conversation.
That's great. All right.